juicy.net.
Hi readers, welcome to the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas in this read-aloud annotated video series by the Battle of the Books Quiz Center. This is one of the 2026 Oregon Battle of the Books high school level titles chosen for the competitions that will be coming up in 2026, starting in like February, March. Okay, so here we go. And remember, I'm going to be talking throughout it with my highlighter pen and telling you what things I think are going to be questions that I put in my quiz. Now, first of all, the first part is like a backstory, the mythology, and like everything's going to be a question. Usually the yellow marks are, spaced out, but the first part of this, because I did look at it before, is very thick with details, and so they will be questions. So here is sort of the prologue, which is going to be like all of them will be questions. First, there was only Sol among a sea of stars. Sol. There was only Sol. Sol is sun in Spanish. First, there was only Sol among a sea of stars. Alone, they formed the world by gathering stardust in their hands. From the dust pressed between their fingers, mountains grew. From their tears of loneliness, oceans and rivers flowed. From the water, the desolate earth grew lush trees and jungles. And from the new earth, Tierra was formed, and Sol was not alone. The world was beautiful and exciting, but the couple was alone in the universe with no one to share it with. They decided to create a race of godly children. First, Tierra brought forth gold from deep within the earth, and Sol shaped it into the golds. The golds were powerful, but vain. They wanted only to test the limits of their strength, busying themselves with their work instead of spending time with their creators. And so Sol and Tierra tried again. Next, Tierra brought forth Jade from the cavern where the ocean met the shore, and Sol shaped it into the Jades. The Jades were kind but focused. They were so immersed in finding new ways to bend and channel their powers that they had no thoughts of their family. And so Sol and Tierra tried again. Last, Tierra brought forth obsidian from the edges of the earth's hottest flames, and Sol shaped it into the obsidians. The obsidians were passionate but selfish. They sought only destruction, not the development of their home. Eventually, Sol and Tierra grew tired of shaping gods. Sol went down into the earth and planted their heart deep beneath the ground to be closer to their beloved. Sol's heart's blood mingled with the humble dirt, and, unexpectedly, humans were born. The small mortals were welcomed and given a home in Reino del Sol. By nature of their short existence, the humans held more compassion and empathy, loved more fiercely than any god could through an eternity. Sol and Tierra loved the humans most of all, so they tasked the gods with caring for the fragile creatures, to provide for them, inspire them, and learn from them. The golds, jades, and obsidians fought viciously about what aspects of life they would rule over. Sol put an end to the fighting by making a 7-pointed star out of clay and filling it with all the powers the gods could possess. All the gods took turns hitting it with a stick, but it was a gold god, Luna, whose blow cracked it open. From the broken clay, stars rained down. The golds grabbed the brightest stars, containing the greatest responsibilities. The jades searched among the smaller stars for the ones most precious to them. The obsidians snatched their stars from the dust and hid them deep in the earth, where the broiling heat and the pressure of their greed turned their gifts black and brittle. Agua took stewardship of the oceans and all of the life within. Pan Dulce guarded the hearth and gave her name to the mortal's favorite treat, sweet and soft and colorful. Fauna made all the animals. Guerrero made the great cats in their own image. Quetzal made the birds in hers, and they were all beloved. The Obsidians, Verganza, Chupacabra, and Chaos, grew angry. They were jealous of how Sol loved the humans. Instead of celebrating human life with other immortals, the Obsidians wanted humans to serve and worship them. Chaos longed for the world before this rigid structure. Chupacabra thirsted for blood, and Venganza crafted a plan to center himself above all the others. They sought out Tierra, who was guarding Sol's heart at the center of the earth. The clever Chupacabra limped and whimpered into Tierra's path, tricking his attention away while Venganza and Chaos stole Sol's heart. Without Sol's heart to warm the earth, the Obsidian turned Sol and Tierra's cherished humans into mindless creatures who existed only to worship the gods. In order to save humanity, Sol went to the top of their temple. On a stone slab, they drove a dagger into their own chest. When the last drop of blood drained from Sol's body, they reappeared in the sky as a burning, brilliant star. As the sun, Sol was able to trap the traitor gods in the sky within celestial bindings. Back on Earth, Sol's body turned to lava, burning on the sacrificial slab. While Sol could keep the Obsidians trapped during the day, there was nothing to keep them away during the night. Tierra stepped forward and took his beloved's molten body into his arms. Even as it burned his skin from his flesh, Tierra formed Sol's skull into the Soul Stone, which shone brightly at the top of the golden temple. He then took the rest of Sol's body and turned it into smaller sunstones. Each of the remaining gods took one sunstone and placed it at the top of their temple to keep the Obsidians from returning to Reino del Sol. Sol ascended as the sun, watching over the earth and locking the Obsidians within celestial prisons among the constellations. Every night, the betrayer gods tried to escape, but the sunstones kept them away until Sol rises each morning. As long as the sun shines and the stones stay lit, the traitorous gods cannot return. Okay. So that was the prologue. Now chapter 1 starts, and it definitely sounds more modern, and not every single sentence is an important detail to remember. I know one thing. You need to remember that there's the three godly people that were created by Sol and Tierra. And that's the golds, the jades, and the obsidians. And then there's all those details about them, but that's one biggie right there to remember. Okay. All right, people. Get ready. I'm about to say the F word. This is your only warning for the rest of the book. I'm sure that there's going to be many F words, and I'm going to say them all. So, there you go. Chapter 1. Careful, we don't want to fuck up and get caught again, Teo whispered as muffled voices bickered inside his backpack. Okay, so there's voices in his backpack. Finally released from his usual stint in detention, Teo was eager to put the plan he'd spent the last 2 days concocting into action. Bracing himself, he jogged across the street to where the target of today's prank loomed. The academy advertisement was unavoidable. Plastered on a brick wall of the school in large gold letters, it read, "Come see the academy's best compete in the Sunbearer Trials." Okay, I'm going to highlight Teo because that's a main character. We don't know what he's up to yet, except that he's going to do a prank. Yeah, put the plan he'd spent, and he was in detention. His usual stint in detention. I'm going to highlight that too, because that tells you something about his character. He's in detention a lot. Tall figures stood in an arrow formation on the black background of the poster, Power posing and smiling for the camera. Teo recognized the woman standing in the center as Brilla, highlighting, who had been crowned as Sunbearer in the last trials. Okay, so Brilla, who had been crowned as Sunbearer in the last trials. Flanking Bella were other past Sunbearers, recognizable by the golden sunburst crowns they wore on their heads. How can I signal to you? I think I'll just shake my highlighter and you'll see me highlighting something that's going to be a question. So that was one. It made Teo want to barf. He figured since he was forced to see it every day, the least he could do was add his own artistic flair. Unfortunately, the poster was at least as tall as Teo, who was a proud 5'10", thank you, and well out of his reach, which was where Perry and Pico came in. Most people in the city of Quetzalcoatl had a bird, but they were more than just pets. They were companions. It was a lifelong bond between bird and human, okay? Lifelong bond between bird and human. But only Teo and his mom, Quetzal, the goddess of birds, could communicate with them directly. That's a big one. Or in Teo's case, occasionally team up for some light defacing of school property. I'm now guessing there's birds in his backpack. Coast is clear. Come out, you two, Teo said as he unzipped his backpack. Immediately, two birds poked their heads out. You remember how to use these? Teo asked, pulling out two of the smallest cans of spray paint he could find at the store. Of course, Perry chirped. I love these, Pico said, expertly popping the cap off with his beak. So now we know Pero and Pico are birds. The two young caicques, so that's what kind of bird they are, were Teo's partners in crime and always down to clown. They'd agreed to help Teo before he even offered up the dried mango in his backpack. Dried mango, they love that. What's the plan? Pico asked, tipping his head to stare up at Teo. I think they could use some humbling, Teo said, eyeing the golds. Maybe some funny faces, he suggested. I'm open to your artistic interpretations. Great idea, they agreed before taking off. Try to hurry, Teo called after them, checking the time on his phone. You can count on us. The best part of this prank was by the time anyone found his latest work of art, he'd be long gone to Soul Temple. The Sunbearer Trials were biggest out of all the holidays in Reino del Sol. Okay, Sunbearer Trials were the biggest of all the holidays in Reino del Sol. A competition of the very best semidioses that kept the sun fueled and ensured the safety of their world for the next 10 years. That whole thing right there's a question. What had started as a sacred ritual thousands of years ago was now a televised and sponsored event that took over the cities. This reminds me of the Hunger Games, does it you? And Teo and his mom were required to attend. As a simple Jade, Teo knew there was no chance he'd ever be chosen by the omniscient soul to compete. Okay, so a simple Jade. Teo's a Jade. Something he was constantly reminded of by the posters that had been hung on the sides of the buildings and light posts for weeks. They were all over social media, too, making it impossible for Teo to escape. Like their parents, the kids of Gold's gods were stronger and more powerful than Jade demigods. So I'm going to highlight that. Kids of Gold's gods, stronger and more powerful than Jade demigods. Some could produce and control elements and even move mountains. They went to a fancy academy and had fancy uniforms and got fancy training from the age of 7 to be the heroes of Soul. Whenever there was an emergency or disaster, the Golds were summoned to help. Meanwhile, Teo and the other Jades weren't deemed powerful enough to attend the academy, so they got stuck going to public school with mortal kids. Quetzalcoatl High was held together with duct tape and glue, and the only uniform Teo was ever given was an awful lime green gym shorts and a gray t-shirt that didn't fit. While Golds traveled around Reino del Sol saving lives, the most interesting responsibility Teo had was judging the yearly Quetzal bird show. Okay, responsibility Teo had was judging the yearly Quetzal bird show. He was tired of every privilege Golds received getting rubbed in his face. Pico and Petty used their talents to hook into the advertisement's canvas, giving them something to hold on to while they wielded the cans of spray paint and got to work. So they're drawing faces. They're painting faces on the Golds kids' faces, and it's just Golds that are shown on the banner. "I'm getting good at this," Pico said, repeatedly banging his head on the nozzle as he sprayed light blue paint haphazardly across the beaming faces of the Gold semidioses. Semidioses are like kids, teenagers, I suppose, that are part god, part human. Perry's focus was solely on Bria. When Teo asked what she was drawing, she proudly announced, "You said to give them funny faces. Nothing's as funny looking as a cat." That's very clever, Perry. So I'm going to highlight Perry's focus was solely on Bria. The graffiti was messy and definitely looked like two birds had done it, but damn, it was satisfying to see those smug expressions covered in paint. Time for the final touch. Teo dug into his pocket while Pico and Perry glided down to perch on his shoulders. He unfolded a piece of paper he'd scribbled on during detention. "Can you write this across the top?" "Oh, that's a good one, son of Quetzal," Pico chuckled before plucking the paper from Teo's hand and taking off. "What does it say?" Teo heard Perry whisper as she flew after Pico with her can of spray paint. "I don't know, I can't read." Perry held the paper while Pico tried his best to recreate the words. What Pico produced was absolute gibberish. Teo laughed behind his hand, not wanting to hurt the bird's feelings. "That's supposed to be a loop, not a squiggle," Perry said. "It is a loop," Perry huffed. "Will you fly up and show him, son of Quetzal?" she asked. "Don't ask him that," Pico snapped, nipping at Perry. "You know he's sensitive about his wings." Teo pretended he didn't hear them. I'm going to highlight sensitive about his wings. Teo, who's half human, half god, and a Jade, must have wings. Even as his wings flexed against their bindings beneath his shirt. Yep, wings. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he said. They needed to be in and out before anyone saw. The spray can hissed, coating Pico's white chest in sticky blue paint. Teo winced. "Not so loud." "My feathers!" Pico squawked, flapping his wings in dismay. "Teo, we've been caught. Abort, abort!" The spray cans clattered to the ground as Pico and Perry flew off, bickering all the way. As the sound of footfalls approached, Teo scrambled to grab the cans and shoved them in his backpack. Dreading who he'd see, Teo turned toward the voice. Luckily, it was just Yolanda, one of the city's mail carriers, accompanied by a red lord parrot on her shoulder, who delivered letters to residents through their open windows. I'm going to highlight that. "Hello, son of Quetzal," the bird sang with a respectful nod of his head. "What are you still doing at school?" Yolanda said. "Just running to meet Waymack. Just running to meet Waymack," he said, securely yanking the zipper off his backpack shut before jogging to meet her. Yolanda pursed her lips in a knowing look. "No, you weren't." Teo flashed her a toothy, not at all innocent grin. "Well, now I am." Yolanda chuckled and waved him off. "Get going. Try to be on your best behavior at the trials. Waymack's not as young as he used to be." Highlighting now, Waymack and the people of Quetzal had raised Teo. His mortal father had died when he was a baby, and his mom was busy with the responsibilities of being a goddess. So, the city had become Teo's family. Even though he was 17 now, highlighting, they still looked after him, sometimes a bit too closely. "I'm always on my best behavior," Teo called over his shoulder as he darted to the other side of the street. "Spoken like a true troublemaker," Yolanda's voice carried after him. Every city in Reino del Sol was devoted to a god. The ones in the center were nicer larger, nicer, and devoted to the gold greater gods like Agua and Tierra. Meanwhile, smaller cities placed on the outskirts were dedicated to Jade lesser gods like Quetzal. Teo jogged through jungle trees interspersed among buildings draped with vines. From the outside, Quetzal looked like a city that had lost its battle with nature and been swallowed by the dense foliage. But though it was a bit run down, Quetzal was a proud city, lovingly maintained by its people. The defining characteristics of their city was the abundance of tropical birds. So that's the defining characteristic of Quetzal, is that it's got all these tropical birds that dotted the trees like brightly colored fruit. They were everywhere you turned, living in happy companionship with their human counterparts. Here, people and nature were intimately and inextricably linked. Teo pushed through the crowd as he crossed a pedestrian causeway that went over one of the many canals where merchants hawked their goods from boats and canals. I'm going to highlight that there was canals. As he passed the laundromat, Teo held his backpack over his head to protect himself from the gem-colored hummingbirds dive-bombing passerbys who got too close to their street lamp. With the Sunbearer Trials officially starting that night, the streets were filled with even more excitement than usual. Signs reading, "Watch the Sunbearer Trials here," hung in the windows of bars and restaurants, along pictures of soul-themed deserts and drinks inspired by the dios. A large group of people loitered outside the electronics store, watching the TVs on display. Clips of gold heroes flashed across the screens. Teo tried to sneak past without being spotted, but almost immediately a hand caught his backpack. "Teo!" A round-faced man grinned, dragging him into the group. "Who do you think will be chosen to compete?" Mr. Serrano asked, gesturing to one of the displays. Some golds posed and smiled in their crisp uniforms alongside clips of the semidioses saving people from various disasters. This also reminds me of the TV show The Boys. You may have seen it, you may have not, but I'm getting little hints of Hunger Games and also Rick Riordan type, mythology, and some The Boys, which are like, they're superheroes, but they're very human and very flawed and very egotistical. So like, they save people, but then they start not. Anyway, here we go. Their stats were listed in the corner of the screen. "The best of the best, I guess," Teo replied, trying to sound polite through a mouthful of resentment. Luckily, everyone present was too busy theorizing to notice. "Guerrero's kid for sure," Miss Morales replied, scratching the neck of the lilac-crowned Amazon resting on her shoulder. "Agua's boy is far more impressive. Ocello could squash him in one blow. Saul doesn't only care about strength." Teo rolled his eyes and used their arguing as a chance to slip away. He just couldn't escape them. Even kids at school swapped trading cards of the gold heroes and placed bets on who would be chosen to compete in the Sunbearer Trials. They peppered Teo with questions to get the inside scoop, as if he cared enough about the gods to keep tabs. The light changed and Teo crossed the street, dodging a man pushing his Doritos cart and a woman carrying a stack of crates. A bodega sat on the corner, nestled between a bird supply shop and a spice shop. It was a short clementine orange building with windows plastered with flyers and advertisements. Above the front door, the words El Pájaro were written in black letters next to a delicately painted mural of a quetzal. Out front, a man struggled to unload boxes from a small truck. "Whoa, let me help," Teo said, sprinting forward to easily take all 4 boxes in one hand. The ability to carry more boxes than the average middle-aged man was another mostly useless power he had as a Jade. I'm going to highlight that. The ability to carry more boxes than the average middle-aged man. Okay, he thinks it's useless. Seemed to come in handy here. And what he just did also shows me what kind of person he is. He seems helpful and nice and kind. The man leaned back in surprise. Careful! When Teo shifted the stack out of his hand, the man's eyes took him in. A wide smile split his face immediately. Pajarito, he greeted warmly, spreading his arms out at his sides. Ay, Chavo, Teo grinned. Need a hand? Chavo chuckled. I'm highlighting Chavo. And Chavo calls him Pajarito. My back ain't what it used to be, he confessed, slapping Teo on the shoulder. His shirt was cobalt blue, and he wore a matching string of tiny blue feathers around his neck. How's it going, man? Before Teo could answer, Chavo's face scrunched up in confusion. Aren't you supposed to be on your way to Soul Temple? Teo shifted another stack of boxes into his other hand. Just swinging by to pick up my order first. Come, I've already got it ready, Chavo said, ushering him toward the bodega. Huemac's not going to be happy with you, he said with an amused look. Teo snorted. What else is new? Late was late, and his approximate amount of lateness didn't matter. He'd be getting a lecture either way. A bell chimed as Chavo pushed through the door. No cats, an angry voice chirped. Hey, Macho, Teo said as he set the boxes down. Macho, the tiny parrotlet. Macho, the tiny parrotlet, swooped down and landed on the... Macho, the tiny parrotlet, swooped down and landed on the counter. Oh, it's just you, son of Quetzal, he said, distractedly dipping his head to look at the door. What's got him all worked up? Teo asked as Chavo went behind the counter. Don't mind Macho, Chavo said. That stray cat's been busy around again. Always sneaking in and trying to steal, Macho shouted, blue feathers ruffling as he hopped angrily across the tobacco case. No cats! Chavo pulled out a large paper bag that was so packed it had to be stapled shut. Here you go. You remember the Chupa Chups, right? Of course, Chavo said as he rang up the order on its ancient register. I would never forget those. Teo grinned. Perfect. You weren't kidding when you said you were stocking up, Chavo grinned. I'm going to need it, Teo told him, fishing out his wallet from his backpack. Dios Maíz doesn't allow refined sugar and processed garbage in Soul Temple. I'm going to highlight that. Dios Maíz doesn't allow refined sugar and processed garbage in Soul Temple. Man, what I wouldn't give to go to Soul Temple, Chavo said, sighing wistfully as he stroked his goatee. I've never seen gold diose in person. Teo couldn't blame Chavo for being fascinated by the golds. They were rare to come by, especially in Jade cities. They were even bigger celebrities than their semidiós children, famous and untouchable. All of the gods ruled from Soul Temple. I'm going to highlight that. All of the gods ruled from Soul Temple. And only semidioses and priests could make the journey to the island in the center of Reino del Sol. I'm highlighting all of that. I'd like to meet Dios Tormentoso and thank him and Lluvia, Chavo said, glancing back over his shoulder. Behind Chavo were two altar boxes. The larger nicho was painted in shades of turquoise and jade, with illustrations of birds in devotion to Teo's mother. Bird feathers of every color had been laid inside. The smaller, newer nicho was painted in swirls of light blue and gray, with white raindrops and yellow bolts of lightning. Taped inside was a newspaper clipping. Lluvia, the eldest daughter of the weather god Dios Tormentoso, highlighted that, stood in the center of the black and white picture, hands on her hips and beaming. 3 years ago, a hurricane had hit the western coast of Reino del Sol. Highlighting that. 3 years ago, a hurricane hit the western coast. Even though hurricanes were common in September, this one tore through the western Jade cities, requiring the demigods of Tormentoso to be summoned. Lluvia arrived in Quetzlan and managed to tame the angry storm enough to save civilians from the flooded streets, including Chavo and his wife. So, I'm going to highlight that. Lluvia arrived in Quetzlan, managed to tame the angry storm enough to save civilians from the flooded streets, including Chavo and his wife. I'll put in a good word if I run into them, Teo lied as he handed over his debit card. Are you nervous? Chavo asked. eyebrows pinching. Teo frowned, confused. About what? You know, getting selected for the trials. Oh, that? No way. Teo snorted as he took his card and receipt and shoved them into the pocket of his jeans. I'm just there as a formality. Teo had only been 7 years old during the last trials, so he didn't remember much, highlighting that. Remember, they're every 10 years, not every year. What he did know was that Jade semidioses were almost never chosen to compete. The last Jade had been chosen 130 years ago, and they hadn't made it out alive. That's important. All I'm going to do is explore the Gold Cities, eat as much food as I can, and blow all my money on souvenirs. He grinned, the impending sights and travels sending his heart racing. I think that's a foreshadowing, don't you? I mean, we know where this is going. Teo's the main character, and the book's called the Sunbearer Trials. Yeah? So, he's not taking this very seriously, but somehow, I predict he's going to be the guy chosen. But when he looked up, Chavo still looked worried. Hey, only the most powerful and honorable semidioses get chosen, remember? Teo said, bumping his fist against Chavo's shoulder in an attempt to reassure him. I'm just a Jade. That seemed to ease the tension in Chavo's expression. He was back to his apple-cheeked smile. Hey, it don't matter if you're a gold or not, you're still our hero, patron. Teo snatched the bag and shoved it into his already full backpack. All right, okay, I'm out of here before I freaking barf. Chavo laughed as Teo slapped his palm one last time. You should stop by the panaderia. Chavo called after him as Teo bolted for the exit. Veronica made some green concha, especially for Diosa Quetzal. Oh man, you know I can't pass those up, Teo said with a grin. See you in a couple of weeks, Chavo called. I'll literally be counting down the days, Teo said as he slipped out the door. The bell rang after him. No cats! Macho's voice followed. Teo could smell his destination before he even made it around the block. The street was crowded and filled with restaurants, food carts, and taco trucks. The sizzling scent of al pastor hung heavy in the air, tickling his nose along with the sweet smell of elote and the spicy zing of chamoy. If you have never had elote, you got to try it. So good. Teo was so distracted by his growling stomach that he didn't notice anything was wrong until the movement rippled through the crowd, turned heads, and raised voices. The hairs on the back of Teo's neck stood on end, and a moment later, a flock of birds tore down the street. Their screeches filled the air, making everyone stop and stare upward as their colorful feathers streaked across the sky. Teo tried to make out what they were saying, but they were all shouting at once, panicked cries tumbling over one another. A crowd of bodies surged into him, nearly knocking Teo over. That was when the sharp smell of smoke hit his nose. Teo tried to get on his tiptoes for a better look. Down the street, thick black plumes billowed from where the panaderia sat. All at once, the birds' voices became clear. Fire! Fire! Human shouts crashed with the birds' cries. The crowd surged forward again, a wave of bodies trying to get to safety. Teo had to latch onto a light pole to keep himself from being swept away. Where's Maria? A girl wailed. Teo searched and found a little girl crying in the middle of the street. He pushed his way through the crowd and crouched down in front of her. Who's Maria? Teo asked as calmly as possible with adrenaline slamming through his body. Your sister? My doll! For soul's sake. I need you to do something very scary right now, okay? He asked, squeezing her small shoulders to get her to focus on him. You need to get somewhere safe. Find someone you know, and I'll look for Maria, okay? Can you do that? The sound of crackling stones split the air. The large windows of the warehouse where the panaderia was located exploded into shards. I'm highlighting it, that this is the panaderia that is on fire and exploding. A panaderia means a bakery. Teo tugged the girl to his chest and crouched over her. Tiny bits of glass rained down around them. After that, she didn't need more encouragement and took off. Teo stared up at the building engulfed in flames. His heart thudded in his chest, his breath sharp and shaky. Most of the food carts in the alley ran off propane. If the fire from the panaderia got out of control, it'd be a street full of bombs ready to go off. How fast could the whole block burn down? I'm going to go back and highlight this danger that most of the food carts in the alley ran off propane. So if the fire touches those, they're all going to explode. How fast could the whole block burn down? Had anyone summoned help? An anguished scream cut through the air. Through the curtain of smoke, Teo spotted a pair of arms desperately waving for help. The frantic thoughts in Teo's brain cleared in a snap. Only one thought remained. Someone needed help. While everyone else fled from the growing flames, Teo ran toward them. Aha! Now, I know why Teo's going to get picked for the Sunbearer Trials. That is the end of chapter 1. I'm going to put that. While everyone else fled from the growing flames, Teo ran toward them. He's going to go rescue somebody. Okay. That's all for today. I hope you're enjoying this and paying close attention to the things that I am highlighting. And this is kind of fun. This is really fun for me because I don't know where it's going either. We're in this together. Okay. See you later. Keep reading.
You read the books, now ready, get set. BOBQC.net. You read the books, now ready, get set. BOBQC.net.